person are recording this, which I think is helpful for people to refer back to and to memorialize the wonderful conversation we're all about to have. Welcome to Developers Roundtable. I have, as promised, kind of a short little updates from staff, and then we'll open it up to hear what's going on out there. I have some kind of thoughts of what we're seeing here at the city that I think are important for you all to hear from us. And I think it's an interesting time right now. We have seen things pretty slow here at the city. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that when we open it up and where we think things are going to head, throughout the next year or so. So first today we have some of the planning team here who is going to talk about an upcoming ordinance that's going to come forward to Planning Commission and then City Council to address things related to some ADU regulations and other regulations specifically pertaining to housing development. And so David's here to talk about that. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the state laws that were signed as late as like October last month, and will go into effect most of them in January, some in July, but that will impact our operations here at the city and also what people can do out in the community. Talk about some enhancements to the website and other things we've done here at the city, and then open it for discussion. So with that, I will hand it over, I believe, to David to talk a high-level overview of the ordinance that we're working on that will go to Planning Commission in the next 2 months.
In February.
Yeah. 3 months.
Yep.
So take it away, David.
Cool. Hey everybody, I'm David Amini. I'm the housing coordinator here in community development. So I'm just gonna give a real brief overview. First, we're gonna jump into the state law changes and then into the city zoning code updates to accommodate the various state law changes that we have going forward. So the first section, there are a lot of assembly bills and Senate bills that have been passed regarding impact fees. The big takeaway is that local agencies have to provide more information upon request regarding the specific impact fee breakdowns. And this information is provided in our comprehensive fee schedule already. But if there's more of a specific breakdown requested, then it has to be basically furnished by the city. And also the cities are required by new laws to provide an impact fee tool on their website to estimate the development impact fees for a particular project. And in coordination with that new law, HCD is basically releasing a suggested fee schedule for cities to take into account. And then the deferral of impact fees to occupancy for affordable housing projects. Impact fees now can be universally deferred to occupancy, but that threshold is 50% low income or greater deed restricted units. Regarding ADUs, there were a couple bills that went through most recently. One of them highlights the ADU amnesty law. So it requires cities to provide a process for homeowners to permit unpermitted ADUs and JADUs. Previously, there was a requirement for anything constructed 2020 or after. Now it's just incorporating any structure even earlier than 2020. Cities have to provide a method to permit these structures. And then the highlight that a lot of people are talking about is the multifamily ADU amount. So on any multifamily lot, you can have an equal number up to 8 detached ADUs as the existing amount of multifamily units. So for example, if you have a fourplex, then under the state law, you'd be allowed 4 detached ADUs per the state law.
Can't be a duplex, has to be detached ADU.
Yeah, that's the wording of
or can the ADUs be a duplex as long as they're detached from the main residence?
The state law wording is detached.
So that's what I mean. So I think overarching comment is this is a high level overview. Some of this we still are working with our city attorney's office to figure out what it means. And kind of one of my comments that I was going to make later when I was talking high level about state laws is we don't we're gonna all learn by doing, basically, when it comes to this stuff, because some of it is very unclear when the state writes it. We're still learning by doing with laws that were passed 4 years ago, because people come in with something that we never even thought about that. And so we obviously do our very best to interpret the law in a way that we all think makes sense, but you know, we encourage you to come in early if you have ideas about things you want to do that are pertaining to a new state law, so we can say, great question, does detached mean they all have to be detached from each other, or can it be a detached 8-unit building in the back?
I would be shocked, because it's always been duplex for duplex.
So, and that's exactly what we need to figure out, you know, what that means for us. So I think as you have these questions, please send them our way so we can work with our city attorney's office, talk to other cities and figure out, so we can hit the ground running, but, you know, but that's great.
I think it's important to say, though, that if the state law says that they need to be detached, you guys still have the power to allow attached units. So I think that that's important to say, that that the city if for some reason the interpretation really is the state's like, no, you have to have 8 separate buildings, as long as you guys are providing more density or an easier path to housing, I think that would be consistent with the state law. And so I just want to say that out loud, because we'll come back to that over and over, and this is that you guys have the power to say, you know what, I don't care if it's attached or detached, we're going to allow attached. And then we're not going to have a conversation about this again. We're not going to waste staff's time talking to lawyers about the nuance of whether they added a comma or not.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, we can always be more permissive with state law. What I will say to that is, we have to go to council and change the code. I can't just say,
Yeah.
hey, state law says this, and the state has been clear that it means this, but
Actually,
I need
to allow more, you're always allowed to do.
I have to have a
path.
path forward, and I need the code to give staff the path that says, hey, we want to allow 10, and we don't care if it's a big building in the back, but the city council has to adopt the code, so I have a path forward. So yes, John, you're right, and we need to like package those up and as they come up, and that's why we're thinking about this early, because if there's things we want to recommend to council through like David's gonna get into like a more immediate ordinance we're making, but we probably will need to follow up with like a cleanup ordinance, and if there's things that are coming up that we want to recommend to council, like, hey, it says 8 detached, unclear, but the way we want to interpret it is that it can just be detached from the main building and they all can be attached to each other. Council, good, we're good, let's go, right? So I think that needs to be clear as staff. We can't just say, hey, we can be more permissive than state. We have to have the code to allow us to do that. Otherwise, a director could just say, be more permissive than all of the zoning doesn't matter anymore, right? We have to have parameters. But John, you are correct in that if we all decide we want to go to council and recommend something and have them adopted in the code, we absolutely can, and I think should do that, because then it provides certainty into the future, regardless of who's the director, who's planning manager, to move forward. So.
I think that's a good point, is you know, we have to understand, like, what does it mean if we are more permissive? Does it matter? Is there impacts that we haven't thought about? So we just have to think through those.
Yeah.
On here. There's some new state laws regarding the density bonus, clarification of residential care facilities for the elderly, qualifying as senior housing developments under density bonus law. And this one I pulled out might be important. Student housing projects. Previously, if you had a project that included over 20% of housing units dedicated, deed restricted to lower income students, you would receive 1 concession, but this updates it and creates this 23% number. So developments that include 23% of housing units dedicated to students, specifically lower income, receive 2 concessions under the law. And then some laws, you know, updating, streamlining, and kind of updating existing laws that are pretty relatively recent. There's some modifications to Senate Bill 9 regarding lot splits. Previously, there was authorizations for local agencies to deny housing developments based on a specific adverse impact on the environment. That was removed specifically for SB 9 projects. It also there's a new requirement for a 60-day response period from the time that a completed application is received by the jurisdiction. And then some modifications to SB 684, which is the 10 lot subdivision bill that passed pretty recently. The applicability, now the Senate Bill 684 provisions apply to vacant single-family lots in addition to multifamily zone lots. Previously, it was just for multifamily zone lots. Okay, I'm going to get into the immediate zoning code updates that are going to be presented in February before Planning Commission. So the existing zoning code regarding the number of ADUs, we're going to change the language a little bit to allow multiple configurations of number of ADUs if all the requirements of state law are met. And so this new state law section 66323 basically provides for ministerial approval of a combination of a single detached ADU, a J ADU, and then an attached ADU or conversion of an accessory structure. And there's various requirements under that state law section that basically provide for ministerial approval of any combination of those ADUs. And then just a couple cleanup changes, fire sprinkler requirements. If a fire sprinkler is required on ADU, it doesn't trigger a fire sprinkler in the primary residence. Also defining a 60-day window for approval or denial of an ADU application just based on state law. Then also changing the applicability of JADUs a little bit. They're allowable on any single family zone lot with an existing or proposed residence. And then the allowable zones where an ADU is allowed, we're just expanding that to more zones. But the key thing here is in non-residential zones, there has to be an existing or proposed structure on the property. And so a proposed structure in a non-residential zone would basically mean a mixed use style development. And with that, an ADU would be allowed. And this is just a change to accommodate the state law requirements.
Can I go ahead and add something?
Yeah.
So the fire sprinklers on ADUs not triggering sprinkler requirements in the primary residence. We just spent the past year working with HCD on the ordinance language, what the implications are, because the code, the occupancy classifications for duplexes are different than triplexes. And so what this is allowing essentially is a duplex to be potentially turned into a triplex without having to go back and add sprinklers into it. However, if that is something that this, a developer pursues, it's still going to probably trigger an occupancy classification change from the R3 to the R2, which has several other additional fire prevention measures. All of those requirements for the R2 would be required in the primary existing residence. It's just the sprinkler component that would not be extended to the existing residence. So if you're changing the actual occupancy classification because of the number of units, you will have to make updates to the existing primary residence.
Great, thanks, Mike. So urban lot splits. We currently have a urban lot split in our ordinance for SB 9 qualifying projects. So that applies to parcels that are R1 zoned. So we're looking at rolling out the urban lot split ordinance to multifamily zones to comply with the requirements of 684. And so the 684 provides for no more than 10 resulting lots with a minimum lot size of 600 square feet. And the total average floor space of a development under this section of the ordinance and under state law, it has to be no more than 1750 square feet. And then the same requirements that we kind of already have for the SB 9 lots will apply to these multifamily lot splits, particularly, relating to lots having to face either street frontage or a common access easement. And then the state law doesn't require that ADUs have to be allowed on the newly created lots under the provisions of 684. And then a couple important points. If the application involves the demolition or alteration of existing housing units that are either deed restricted to lower incomes or they've been occupied by tenants in the last 5 years, the city is not required by the state law to approve the lot split. And then any kind of lots that have, any of these conditions going on, farmland, wetlands, or very high fire hazards, any of these kind of special cases, they're not required to be split under the state law. And then a new development under this provision must result in at least as many units as 66% of the maximum allowable density in the underlying zone for the parcel. And then another caveat, if the parcel is identified in our housing element, there's a couple parcels that we have identified for, that are vacant or kind of underutilized. The density has to be at least at that level that's identified in the housing element or greater. And yeah, just another overview of the dates that these things will be going in front of planning commissions. We got February planning commission date, and then city council in March.
We have an online question.
Oh.
Go ahead, Greg.
I just have a question. As you're doing cleanup of ADU policy, what is the current status of the match requirement for ADUs?
I was gonna bring that up. This actually all started because of the ongoing wonderful conversations we all have about the roof form and shape matching the existing residents on site. So we're getting rid of that. So that should be like a big bullet point here. This was really focused on state law, but that's kind of where this all started, was just trying to address some of the barriers or just keep running into the same issues. And so David can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our proposal at this point is just getting rid of that language.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly the state is also moving toward, so starting in January, I think it's January or July, we will be taking in like stock plans basically for ADUs. So an architect or designer can come in and say, hey, here's a plan I have for an ADU that meets state law. Can you kind of pre-approve it? And then we post it on a website. We pre-approve it, post on a website, and then people can basically, I suppose it works, they go back to the architect that created it and say, hey, I want to use the plan that the city's already pre-looked at. They come back in, they give it to us in the context of their property, and then it's a faster review for them because we've already looked at the actual structure. We obviously need to look at setbacks and things like that. But the state law is clearly moving in the direction that it does not matter what the design of the main house is, and that was just really difficult language for us to work on, and resulted in what honestly I'll say what I kind of thought were worse designs than what originally came in the door, because we were trying to match roof pitches to something that looks totally different, is a different scale. It made no sense. So yes, long story short, that language is going away.
That language was actually not in. We worked to get that taken out from the very beginning, and it got slipped in one December when nobody was paying attention after it had already been taken out. I'm not sure why that happened, but it wasn't in the beginning.
Okay. So good news is it's coming out. But I encourage all of you, the staff report and draft ordinance will be posted before the planning commission meeting. Please submit comments, come to the planning commission meeting. If there's other things you want the planning commission to consider or refinements, please let the planning commission and staff know. And I am almost certain that this will be followed, in the new year by kind of a cleanup, and once we kind of see what the new suite of changes from the state looks like, and if we're running into constant questions on the same thing, we're going to take a cleanup item and just say, hey, let's handle it this way. What do you think, city council, and get it in the zoning code so that it's clear for everyone.
If I can find the city council meeting where that was voted to be not included, can you just start honoring that now?
It's in the zoning code. I mean, if you want to take the time to find that and see, you can see if it accidentally came back in, and you could work with the city attorney to see if it was a clerical error, but we have to look at the zoning code. But if you have evidence that it was a clerical error that it made it back in, I'd be happy to review that. Okay, David, you good? Any other questions or anything? All right. So, my image not show up where it says helpful resource.
It did, when I combined them, it got funky, so that's what you have now.
Okay, my helpful resource didn't show up, but, so I wanted to highlight, David did a great job. Really, the main themes of the legislature this year was streamlining permitting and adding additional density. David covered those. Lots of things about fees, so increased transparency. There seems like utility companies having to post on their websites like anticipated timelines for utilities and fees for that. I know we run into issues here with projects that are done and then can't get electrical hookups, things like that. Some things for CEQA, some extended sunset dates for several CEQA exemptions that might be interesting to people here related to housing. Some stuff about housing element law and housing accountability act. Importantly, like increased enforcement to cities that are not complying with housing element law or housing accountability. Also, not necessarily pertinent to this group right now, but I think something that will become interesting is new income categories for RENA. So that's our, that's how the state tells us which types of units we need to accommodate, and they've added like, I can't remember what they're called, but like
Acutely low.
acutely low, which is like 0 to
20%.
20%. And so where I think this is going, that it's possible that in the next housing element cycle, RENA also includes cities having to accommodate and show progress toward providing housing to acutely low populations, because right now it kind of ends at very low. So that'll be a really interesting shift to see if that happens and kind of hold cities accountable to things like transitional and supportive housing, shelters, things like that. And then density bonus law, so David covered the increases for specifically, I think student housing would be an interesting one in this community. I was also at the state planning conference and there was a lot of discussion on, and this has already been passed, but I haven't heard a lot about it around here, but it's a big thing in kind of the LA area, which is the stacked density bonus that was recently put into place where you can stack basically 2 different density bonuses on top of each other. So you provide moderate units and low income units in the same, low units in the same building, and you can get the benefits of 2 density bonuses on top of each other for the purposes of increased density and waivers and things like that. So I'd encourage you all to take a look at that. I haven't really seen that being explored much here, but. All right. Oh, and the helpful resource, I'm sorry to shut. Holland and Knight is a law firm. They've published on November 5th a really, really good comprehensive list of a lot of the different specifically housing related changes that the state is implementing. And it's a good place to start. It has a very short kind of summary of each one, but you can then go look up the state language, and they've organized it by whether it pertains to enforcement or CEQA, things like that. So if you Google Holland and Knight, California 2025 housing laws, very, very valuable resource where it's
We
all
can
been,
link it on the website.
okay, perfect, where it's all been kind of compiled. So I would say, if you're interested in this at all, please take a look. All right, then I wanted to highlight, we've created a specific web page for this group where you can ask to get on the email list. We will post resources here, so instead of spamming you all with continual emails about things, when we're doing fees, we send you, here's the fee schedule, here's the staff report. My hope is that we upload it here. We also have a question submittal and suggestion box. So if there's a specific question you want to talk about here or a topic you want to have us kind of prepare to talk about, more than happy to have people submit things here. Right now, you can't get to this website through our main web page. We're trying to figure out where it should live, but Lala did send the link out in the email, and feel free to share that with people you think may be interested. So my hope is this can be a place also where we house the recordings of this and the PowerPoints and things like that, just anything that you all think would be helpful information as we move forward.
And it also has the tentative dates for 2025.
Yeah, and also tentative dates. We're trying to plan ahead so we don't, and if you see some major scheduling issue, please let us know. We're happy to try to accommodate around things where most of the group is. There was an AIA meeting at one point, and obviously didn't want to have this meeting conflict with that. Next slide. Before I move on to this, I want to highlight actually other things that we've done. So last developers roundtable, I heard several concerns from you all that were really helpful. One was kind of a specific concern, maybe with you, but bounce back messages. So when staff is out of the office, just it's obviously unacceptable for it to just say, I'm gone, period. Yeah. So we have a template. Everyone has to use the same thing. It's clear about when you will be back, who to contact in your absence, other resources that people may want. So if you're not seeing that from staff, let me know, let their supervisor know that, it's clearly very important when you have a project, that you know when the person may be back, and if they're not back, you have a question you need to reach out to. We've made some enhancements. We're hearing things about coming to the counter and not getting a circling back when there's questions and things. So we have now a dedicated person at the front counter that's there all the time. So even when it's not open counter hours, we're able to partner with that. Mike and his team have actually worked very hard on implementing an internal system to check people into the counter and take inquiries that then we can take. We have stats about what questions we're getting, the types of requests for building or planning or engineering. And then the person sitting at the front counter is able to shoot off an email to the correct either inbox, like planning inbox, or a specific planner that says, hey, please follow up with this person. The question is about X, Y, Z. And so instead of relying on notepads or just come back later, it's that. And even when there is a counter appointment made, if there's follow-up needed, we use that system to ping the correct person and require that follow-up. So hopefully that is going to help the kind of closing the loop with information. Mike, do you want to share anything else about the?
Yeah, it's the same software that we currently use through our Ask Slow app. And so what we're actually doing when somebody comes in with a question or a comment is we're creating basically a work assignment or a task for employees. And the nice thing about the way this software works internally is that an employee can reassign that task. And so if you come in to the counter, you check in, let's say you need to talk to Public Works, Planning, and Building, you can say, okay, well, we'll get you on the queue for Public Works. Once you've spoken to them, they can transfer to the queue of Planning. Or if you need to talk to a specific technical professional, they can just reassign it to Rachel in Planning, and she will follow up with you. The other nice thing about it is once that work order is closed out or that task is closed out, it sends out an email thanking you for coming into the counter, and any notes that you might have had or asked to be put into the system would be documented there and then sent to you from the city in an email. And so just trying to collect and organize the information and even memorialize some of the conversations that are had on a regular basis at the front counter.
The other thing we heard was, hey, I hear one thing and then someone said, like, you didn't say that, or, and so one of the things we're trying to get ahead of is have something in writing from the city, and so I would say, if you're coming to the counter and you're hearing something, and I want to hold on to that tidbit, please ask the person, hey, can you put that in the notes for this? Like, can you memorialize that for this project? The city's interpretation is X, Y, Z. Having said that, that it's, this is why a lot of cities don't do that, is because I will encourage staff, if they don't know, to say, I don't know, I need to go talk to someone. And so what we should be writing down is absolute certain things. And so, that is on us then to make sure that if someone at staff says to you, I'm not sure, I need to go check, or I need to follow up on that, you need to trust that they'll do that. And that's why they might hesitate to write something down, right? If there's not a for sure answer. If there's a for sure answer and we're confident, yes, we'll absolutely put it there. But, you know, if we need a little more time to do something, that's why we created this system to close the loop. And I would say, you know, you all know staff pretty well, but always get the person's name and cards that you know. It's helpful for me or for Tyler when you say, yeah, I talked to Christopher at the counter and he said we can then follow up with them. It's really hard when someone doesn't have a specific name.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, the nice thing about the system is it'll have documentation of everyone who you spoke with when that person inputs the notes or it's been reassigned to them. So if you do forget who you've spoken to, it'll be logged, it should be logged. The other thing is there is a code section in the building code that says the building official does not have the authority to waive the requirements of the code. And so even if I tell you that you don't need to get a permit to install a piece of public art, then, and it turns out that you're pouring a foundation and you actually do need a permit for it, I don't have the authority to waive that requirement, even if I give you bad information. So what this is really doing for the leadership in CDD is memorializing what's being said at the front counter. So that way, when these disputes do come up, we have the appropriate documentation to address it and use it as learning opportunities or an accountability measure for staff.
So hopefully that, I mean, and we, again, value comments, concerns as we continue to work through this process, but we really are trying to address the clear things that we heard coming up at the last meeting. And I think this is hopefully going to be a good solution for all of us. It's helpful for us to hear what's going on at the counter and see what people are talking about. And the stats will be very helpful too. I think one of the things we've all talked about is, you know, especially with the fee update is our staffing level appropriate, you know, and if we're able to pull stats and see, hey, 80% of the questions are building related, not planning, then we know where we need to dedicate resources where we can then get people moving faster through the system. So.
Can I ask a question on
Yeah.
SB 10 and ADUs? I submitted an application using SB 10 and ADU knowledge based on HCD feedback, and my application was denied. And I double checked again with HCD and said, no, that's not allowed. Haven't really done anything about that yet, but given all of these changes that are coming up are going to be way more dense than what I have drawn. And I've already gotten the response back from HCD that it was not allowed to be denied. Can we take a look at that again?
Did you provide us with the HCD response?
I don't know if I emailed it. I have to double check, but I did come to the counter and let them know that.
Okay. So I would say in that situation, it's so helpful for us to see the HCD. One of the things is like HCD doesn't tell us when someone says, you know, it's an affirmative comment from them that says, yeah, the city didn't do the right thing here. So it's really helpful for us to get that documentation along with whatever, you know, whoever you're working on and say, hey, I went to HCD and this is what they said. Please look at this. Because we don't get an automatic, I have no idea what people are asking HCD or what they're saying. Tell you, I've asked them and say, hey, it was really helpful if you can tell us like, hey, the decision letters you're getting so we can make sure we're doing the right thing. But we don't have that. But yes, we absolutely, whenever people get information from HCD, we're more than happy to look at it and apply it to the project. Okay, so other things that may be interesting to this group in particular, lot 7, this is part of San Luis Ranch. So this is one of the last remaining undeveloped lots. It was originally entitled as a commercial parcel for specific plan. It's coming in for city council initiation to amend the specific plan and the general plan to allow it to be essentially mostly residential. So that will be an interesting meeting. I wanted to highlight for you all. Again, this is just the initiation. So it's council saying, yes, we like this idea or no, and then it still needs to go through the process to go through planning commission and city council for the final approval. There's an appeal of a CUP for a cannabis retail business. This will be in January on city council. I believe it's on Broad Street.
Yes.
Okay. And then this, an exciting kind of development in one of our work program items for this year was to start outreach on Upper Monterey to business owners and property owners about what their vision is for that area. And so we're beginning that work with the first meeting within the next month for the.
Yeah, we'll be looking at whether it's gonna be next month in December or early kind of mid-January. I'm not sure yet. We're still working that out with our consultant, also just available kind of space to have those.
Now, is that defined as above the tracks or all the way down to Santa Rosa?
It's defined as basically Santa Rosa up to California.
It's sort of mid-Monterey, actually.
Yeah.
You can argue. All right.
So this is exciting. So depending on the outcome of this outreach, we would probably be going to city council as part of the budget process to ask for kind of permission and funding to move forward with the area plan or amendments to the code, so this will inform what we need to do to achieve the goals of that area. Really important for this group is the budget process. So the 25-27 financial plan is being developed and the community has a major part in that. So the December 10th city council meeting is kind of a setting the stage for the council of, hey, where are we? What do things look like? What does the budget mean? January meeting is setting, foundational information about existing budget, where we are, how we budget at the city, and then I think a really important one is the January community forum. There's also an open survey that opened 2 days ago online. We can send out the link to that, but you can find it, I think, on our Instagram and our city website. Very important space where you have the ability to say, hey, I think the city should have a work program item related to
Chris Richardson.
Higuera Street or Upper Monterey or addressing, downtown vacancies or whatever you think it should be. So the council does take all of that information in, and the community forum is a time also for people to come weigh in on the priorities of the city. I cannot stress enough how important the financial plan is for setting the work program for the department. I mean, this is like one of the great things that we do here at this city in particular is very clear work programs for a 2-year period. And so we have a checklist of things that we just tick off and can tackle within the 2-year period because it's a very deliberate process and the council has funded the things to get them done. And so if there are things you think we need to tackle in the next 2 years, this is the time to bring them up. It's harder to squeeze them in later. Things that we are kind of looking at is finishing out some of the work program items that are already happening, some of the larger specific plan amendments, looking at the housing element. The next one is due in 2028, so we're probably going to need to do a little legwork the end of 2026 and 27, and addressing some of the addressing all of the state laws, so really diving in to make sure we are doing all the programming and policy changes we need to do to address state laws. We also had previously worked, and I brought this up in this group before, with the AIA and the chamber to create a matrix of kind of things that were of interest to that group to address barriers to housing development. So I would encourage everyone, refer back to that document. It went to council several times. They called it the housing matrix or something. And we basically told council, here's a bunch of ideas that came out of this working group. And these are things that we think you should consider during the budget cycle to see if any of them rise to the level that you want to direct staff to tackle them. And it ranged from looking at the height and the requirements for downtown development and mixed use to specific area plans, Mid-Higuera, Upper Monterey, to creating more objective design standards, clarifying the code, things like that. So any questions about any of this? But please be involved in the budget setting process. It's huge, and it is how we get our work program for the next 2 years. I also wanted to Scott, I don't think is here online, but Scott Collins is gonna be our new assistant city manager, which is very exciting. So assistant city manager oversees the community services group, and that includes community development, utilities, public works, parks and rec. And so I think that will be a wonderful addition to the team, someone who is in the development world, and obviously very tuned into housing. And so Scott is gonna start in December, and we're very excited. Scott, are you here?
I don't think so.
So then I wanted to open it up to a roundtable. Just threw some questions up here. What are we seeing? What's going on in the development world? Challenges? What's going well? Started off by saying we're seeing things pretty slow. Literally since July 1st, it really, the applications that have come in have really slowed down kind of across the board.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and we thought maybe it's election uncertainty, interest rates are high, other things are going on. I think Mike talked to this point, but the inverse of that is we're seeing a lot more work without permits, because people are doing smaller projects and not getting permits for them. So get your permits, and if you have questions, ask. So we're seeing a lot of work without permits. We're seeing slowdowns on some larger projects. We're seeing a lot of people coming back in and requesting changes to previously entitled projects, which I totally understand given the economic impacts of rising costs of everything. And so what I'll say there is we have really done a lot to work with people as that's coming in. It's so, so helpful. Tell us early. Like, if you think there's something in your project that you're not gonna be able to do, please tell us as early as possible. We try to work with everyone, but it's really hard when it's like, hey, we're closing in 3 days and we can't meet this condition. So I would say, even if you think it's a possibility, just call us and ask us so we can tell you, here are the paths forward. And maybe here's something you could do to get what you need, but not have to get a director's action or something. We're always trying to help get you where you need to go, but it's really helpful when we have time to work through it. And I think, it's being realistic with the entitlements. A lot of these things were entitled years and years ago, and so we're kind of dealing with even some pre-COVID, very, at this point, unrealistic entitlements. And so I understand how things have changed, but, I think it's important to remember to be realistic with what is going to planning commission and council for approval, not over-promising. But again, we are here to help facilitate. So if you have things coming up with your projects and you need us to look at it, please ask us early, and we're happy to figure out your potential paths forward.
Greg has a question.
Yeah, Greg.
Well, what I'm hearing on the street, what I'm seeing on the street, is everybody thinks that everything is building too quickly. There's a lot of activity, but that was entitled so long ago. And people don't understand that there was such a lull during COVID and even before COVID, that we're catching up with some of that stuff. But if you go downtown, and you throw in the paving program, and you throw in the new garage, and you throw in the stuff over on the Foster Street side, there's a lot of stuff, particularly in the downtown area, that's disruptive for traffic. And people just think, oh my God, everything's happening. When really it's not. It just appears to be that way. It's interesting to hear you say that it is a lull now, that you've got, the applications are down.
Yeah, the past, it was a pretty clear line. I would say we were hitting kind of our projected numbers up until July. And then July was a little bit of a cliff.
And I would just say to put it into perspective, it feels actually like we're in an area where it's manageable for city staff. And so it doesn't seem like got the gas to the floor like we did when we had an influx of applications. And it seems like we actually peaked with applications, considering the volume of them as well as the kinds of applications in March of 22. And so exactly what you're saying is now we're seeing the work taking place in the community from what has been happening over the last couple of years.
It's just construction disruption is what
Yeah.
it is now, and that's what people see.
Right.
They don't understand the process.
Greg, did you have a question?
I have a question. One of the challenges that I know we see is issues dealing with response by PG&E. I know PG&E is not within your purview, but does the city have any lever that they can push on to PG&E to be a bit more responsive? We're sometimes waiting 6 months to get, engineering drawings back. And I'm hoping that the city, we're bound by the monopoly that we have. And I'm wondering if the city has any way to request a little bit better response. And I would throw in the gas company too. Let's start with PG&E.
Yeah, we totally hear that. I think a lot of it, we don't have a lot of levers. We have relationships. A lot of it comes down to relationships. I'll tell you. He's not here, so I can say, but Hal is, works with them often. And even not just the timing issue, but if there are disagreements about what needs to be done, Hal is really good about picking up the phone and just working with them. This is, I know, something that Whitney has been concerned about since she came in as assistant city manager, and we'll work with Scott on, but I wish I had a better answer, but a lot of times we're in the same boat, and, specifically on like affordable housing projects, it just is so difficult and really impactful to these projects. And so we do whatever we can to help facilitate when there's something that we can control, but at the end of the day, we don't have a lot of leverage there. I think probably what that state law is getting at is some of this issue where they're requiring larger utilities to post anticipated timeline. I mean, but what is an anticipated timeline? So they post an anticipated timeline online, but doesn't necessarily hold them to anything. But I think that's probably what the state law is getting at, is these kind of repeated issues. We have the same issue actually for our own city projects. We have a park that got finished and the park was done, and it was going to be months, if not more, before we could even get power to a city park. And so, it's leveraging relationships, but other than that, I don't know if any other staff has.
Yeah, I can offer. I mean, we
Yeah.
got a similar one over at the water treatment plant where they were, and we understand that they're hardening up their infrastructure, a lot of past fires there. They gave us notification, very short notification, if we're taking the water treatment plant offline and you're not gonna have any power to it for this length of time. This is while we're in the middle of that large reservoir project, we're putting in additional backup generators. And it was, you're gonna put 100,000 people out of water if you do that. This is gonna be a major issue. And we were able to, through some relationships, get a nice response of, okay, we can hold it off, but to the point that felt like a victory, that we even got them to hold off of not shutting a water treatment plant off. That's kind of, yeah, we're in the same boat.
Yeah, so good question, Greg. We know this is an issue. We see it, we hear about it all the time, and we do what we can, but we don't really have levers.
I guess what I would ask, and I recognize your points, and most of our projects don't have 100,000 people that we can lever over PG&E. But I would like to request that council or LAFCO or the board of supervisors kind of gather together and write a letter to PG&E that says, hey, we're not being served in a timely way, and beg, if not for lack of a better term, see what happens. Right now, we're not using any of the bully pulpit that we have as a city or a region. They can say no to that too, but I think we should try.
Yeah, that's great feedback. I will absolutely bring that up with Whitney. I think we are in a similar boat. So the city has interest in that in our own projects and also in more projects, but I think there's definitely, at least we can try. Yeah, so I will bring that up with Whitney. I think that's a great idea.
There's potentially been recent changes. And I'm not sure to how extent and how big of a changes, but there was a new person put in a position at PG&E. There's been massive amounts of complaint. I mean, what we're talking about here has been not only in our local area, across the state, and apparently there was a political issue happening because they gave the $1 billion loan to Diablo. There was a lot of state representatives that were sticking their nose in and basically not letting PG&E hire additional people because they were afraid they were using the loan for other purposes. And so there was a whole bunch of political stuff going on. I know there's been some changes that have happened, and I can only speak to the fact that we had a project that needed power We got through our inspection and were able to get power 3 weeks later, which we were shocked because we thought it was gonna be 6 months. So.
Did you do anything to get that or just?
No, it's a great question. We didn't pull any political levers.
Yeah.
We were concerned and we were working through the HBA, we were working through the chamber, we were doing what influence we could, but nothing direct.
Interesting.
The one thing that I could say we did do really well on that job is because there was extremely space constraint. We were coordinating with the local people like way early in the design process and keeping them apprised throughout. So they were extremely aware of our project and it had been very well documented and worked through. I have no idea if that was the influence and it was the local PG&E person that helped push it through. I don't know.
It's even difficult to get a phone number for the local, and the gas company won't even take calls. So that's the frustrating part, is the utility that we're all tied to is hiding behind a shield. So it's frustrating.
I don't think anything gets them off the dime. I had an issue on a project and I filed a complaint with the PUC just by a phone call. And they had PG&E on the phone back to me the next day, but I still didn't get it for her. I don't think they really care personally.
All right, I will definitely bring that to Whitney to see if, there's interest in a council level discussion / letter pressure there.
As part of your 2-year work plan in order to kind of encourage, help facilitate growth in the downtown area, last time we met, I talked about the possibility of the city revisiting their historical building ordinances or contributing historical buildings, because there's kind of ran into an issue where really the justification as to why it was historical, but it's a project that we could straightforward and throw us into a full sequel. In that particular case, unfair and unnecessary. So, especially when we went to the documents to see why it was listed as contributing and there was nothing in the file.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how rigorous that process was to originate it, but there might be some buildings or properties out there that may benefit from revisiting that status designation.
Yes, that is actually a current work plan item. I'm gonna kick this over to Tyler, but we are halfway through.
Yeah, I would say a little less than halfway, but we're doing a historic resources update now. And it'll carry at least into the first year of the next financial plan. We'll probably have another year, maybe 1.5 years worth of work left in that. But that was a update that was funded by council. I believe it was funded with $300,000 to update the historic resource list. Also to look at changes to the historic preservation ordinance and guidelines and make that kind of refresh those and make those more current. So that's the kind of like right around middle, a little less than halfway through that process.
And we'll let this group know when those go to public hearings or first meetings on that. A lot of it is background work, but obviously there's opportunity for public input and the approval process will absolutely let this group know when it happens.
I checked in with Brian Lavelle about the status of the ordinance update, and it sounded like that was kind of the first phase, and then later on they're going to look at revisiting the list for contributing and master properties.
Yeah. So we can provide a better timeline if that's helpful for people, but I think it's probably another year or two to finish up the project as a whole.
I would say, yeah, we're probably a year away from gathering.
We'll be ready.
You mentioned a lull. Is that more on development applications? Is it in permitting? I'm curious as to what.
Yeah, it's across the board. And I think some of it can be attributed to, San Luis Ranch is almost done with their single family homes. Rigetti, same. And so we had these 2 pretty large developments that were consistently pulling permits. Tyler and Mike, if you want to speak to your respective areas, but truly we saw this everything go down, even like encroachments and public improvement plans, things like that. But I think it's a combination of several factors and smaller things being done right now. Do you want to speak to the entitlements?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number of applications, it's not down dramatically at all. I think it's fairly consistent. It's the type for us. So like the larger major development reviews and track maps, we're not seeing those. We're seeing kind of more director level, minor use permit kind of activity. So the numbers are similar, but it's just the revenues aren't there.
Yeah, building activity is just down kind of across the board. Same thing, the kind, large scale projects seem to have made it into the permit queue over the last couple of years. There are a couple of large projects that have gone through review and are just kind of sitting, waiting to be pulled. And what I'm hearing is, you know, interest rates are kind of, that we're just waiting to see which way they go at this point before it makes sense to pull some of those larger projects. We are still seeing a steady stream of ADUs coming in, but even with a steady stream of that, that's about 100 new units at most in a single year.
Do these new changes include like caps on, because I know the fees for ADUs, when we look at the fees, we're kind of not in balance with the other fees. Or do these new laws include caps on that?
No, not that I'm aware of.
So in our new fee schedule, we do have like a minimum and then in many categories a maximum, because we're doing it based on square footage. And so what we found when we review plans, when you get buildings, especially certain kinds of buildings of a certain size, you're just essentially dealing with volume of space and not necessarily additional code provisions. And so for several categories, and I believe including ADUs, we have a minimum and maximum for size, and the same thing for single family. That's also the case for commercial buildings. I do know that the current state ADU law allows for jurisdictions to charge impact fees on new ADUs if they are larger than 750 square feet, but it has not been our practice to charge any impact fees for any ADUs up to this point.
I would be very surprised if the city doesn't see any seasonality, at least on the permit issuance. It's absolutely no fun to try to build anything in the city in the wintertime with the soil we're blessed with and with the further constraints that we all have to try to comply to do our best job with the stormwater and not having any track out on the streets. It's in many cases, if we get into this time of year and we're ready to start a project, we're not going to start until April. Just too costly.
And that's consistent with what I'm hearing from some of the developers is that they don't want to start this time of year in the ground.
Yeah. I kind of want to circle back to this idea about your guys' review of state law, and it's great to have the study session in January, and I'm always kind of lost of when the best time to bring the ideas up is, because often by the time that we get to the study session in late January, you guys have already sort of crafted the direction you're going. I do feel like there is a really good opportunity to leverage some of the state laws in a way that's more tailored to our community. Ironically, I sat through a meeting this morning with the mobility division, is that right? About how they're planning the bus routes, right? And if you guys would just get one major transit stop, it would create a development hub around that because of state law, you know? And then, you know, Timmy, we were looking at that, all my special little projects. And what I realized about not being able to use density bonus on anything less than 5 units is that essentially what you have done is precluded almost all of the R2 zone from having deed restricted units. So because R2 is a 4-unit project, right? And so there's these simple things that we can start to look at is like, okay, well, the state says density bonus is applicable to 5 units or more. You could say 4 units, and it basically what it's done is that in the dense area around town, the only deed restricted units are giant apartments, right? And so I know that nobody at the city is intending to not have deed restricted units on smaller parcels. I know that nobody in the city is intending to like cut the diversity of housing, but there's a certain point where it feels like we have a really good opportunity to leverage what the state is doing and really make a change about housing diversity and people of different socioeconomic living with each other and not having kids living in apartments and kids living in single families and not crossing, you know? So I don't know the best way to encourage that. I don't know the best time to encourage that. Like I said, oftentimes by the time we get to the end of January, sort of community voice session, that those things are, that level of change is kind of lost, right? That ability to make a big swipe at some of these policies that just need to get nudged a little bit is, yeah, I'm not even really sure where that.
Yeah, I have some ideas. One, I've never stopped saying this, but I think the budget cycle, I know that feels late, right? Because it starts next July, but things take a while anyway. And so I think a placeholder work program item that is present a suite of ordinance changes that address, you know, diversifying housing types. We know the council wants to see more deed restricted units. They want to see more units. They also really, and we do, want to see deed restricted units. That is where we're deficient with our data. So, right, if we can get a work program item that is present a suite of, you know, work with the community and come up with a suite of things to get more deed restricted units. We kind of were getting there with this missing middle thing last time. But that's the way to get like dedicated resources and us to be able to say, yes, we have this chunk of time set aside. Apart from that, so I would say like, if we can get that to be a council priority, and the challenge is there's 1,000 things they're gonna hear from the public. You know, right now it's fraternity issues, safe housing, bicycle infrastructure, you know, but if we can get that up high for ComDev, that will help. Separate and apart from that, I will say one thing that I think we can use this forum for is maybe in one of the first few meetings of the new year, take a look at these state laws. It's helpful for me to understand as developers, how would you, you know, what would you want to do with this? Now that the state law says this, like, what would you want to do? What are the questions that you would have? And then we can all come back, like, bare minimum, let's all just try to get on the same page and issue spot or question, like, give us a list of questions that we can then take back. Best case scenario, we identify questions or places where the city could be more permissive, and we take those through planning commission and council and have the conversation and change the code, right? But again, the best way to do that is through work program items, and we know we have the time and the dedicated resources to do that. But I think at the very minimum, let's sit around the table after everyone's taken a look at those laws and thought through, how would I want to apply this? How do I think clients would want to apply this? That would be really helpful for us to know.
That's awesome. I guess what occurs to me is then the other city departments maybe need to be looped into that, because they're going to plan the bus transit stops in a silo from you guys. They're not going to think about, you know, what do transit stops do to encourage development. Utilities is going to do their budget, and right, you guys are going to do your budget and maybe not talk about, okay, well, if we increase density here, what about the lateral issue or these other issues, right? And so I don't know that, yeah. And that, again, that's where the timing becomes confusing, is it's like, it always seems like by the time we get to that budget thing, it's like, oh, well, that other department already decided 6 weeks ago that they're doing this or whatever that. So I don't know that there's an easy way to break through those silos, but it does seem like there's some, yeah, I don't know.
Aaron's the other director in the room, and I think what I will say to this and see if he agrees is this group of directors, I think, is working very closely. We've had multiple conversations already about like, here's what I think I'm gonna ask for from the council for resources next year. Here's the issues. Like, as soon as that list of state laws came up, where I went to a conference and I shot them over to the other directors. And so, for example, the way this manifests is the state is serious about these review periods, like they are serious. And so I immediately sent an email out and I said, we need to all figure out, because utilities reviews things, fire reviews things, transportation. So it's, I control my little empire, but like we all have to work together. And so that's how it ends up in the implementation, but I think in the planning phase is really important. But we are talking about how do all the things that we need to get done affect each other. I think that that's happening, probably not as much as it could, but I hear that. I think that's really important. And I think that, again, getting it as a work program item really helps facilitate that, because it is then a directive from council that we can point to and say, hey, Aaron's team, I need help. This is council directed as opposed to, you know, a little side project we're working on. So, but I will bring, I think, when we decide which meeting we want to do this exercise, like let's do a 2-hour tabletop exercise and go through some of the bigger state laws and kind of pull them apart and ask questions. I will ask, you know, kind of keep people from other departments to come in, because I think that's a really good point, is it's not just community development.
I have it pulled up right now on the multifamily ADUs being detached. I have that verbiage pulled up right now, and that's not what it says. So I feel like if we could address some of the stuff in the roundtable phase before it gets written wrong, I think that would be a very good show of faith of like what the spirit of this is in collaboration with the community.
Sure.
Because like 4A, it talks about that the ADU has to be detached from the main residence, and then 4AI, sorry, and then 4A.
Two.
Say that too. Yeah, talks about not being more than 8 detached units. It does not say anything but the ADUs can't be detached from each other. It's always been that if you have a duplex or a 4-plex or a 3-plex density unit, you can mimic that in the ADUs.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's not saying that can't be done. It's just saying not more than 8 detached units. It doesn't say that they can't be attached to each other.
Yeah.
It's talking about the density unit, detached from the density unit.
Yeah, I hear that. We will absolutely look at that. Like one of the things would be, there's 2 things. There's clarity of language, and then there's also interpretation. You know, and that's where it gets hard with. I wish the state law was just super, super clear, right? Detached does not mean that they all have to be detached from one another. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think we just have to think about it in the context of it's 8 instead of 2 other things we're not thinking about. But we will absolutely look at how it's written, how it's been interpreted, and then that's, I think, a perfect thing that we would bring around this table or talk about at the planning commission when it comes up. Was this the intent? Do we need to add clarifying language there to make it clear to everyone that that's how it would work? But in anticipation of that, we will look at whether or not we can add clarifying language in advance of that. But I will say, this is going forward in this timeline. There are things we have to address as soon as we can, just to comply with the basics of state law. That doesn't, we will be doing a cleanup after that. And I think that's where then a lot of this can either be further refined if the planning commission and council don't do it in these meetings, and or more permissive, if that is where the planning commission and council wants to go and we think it makes sense and applies with state law. So I think this is kind of we gotta get this done, and then we're gonna probably, I don't see a world in which we don't do a cleanup, because we just run into other things and or have this conversation and wanna make really clear language, so. Tyler's mad because now there's gonna be another one.
No, I mean, we know there's like, this is like a 2-phase approach.
Yeah.
So what we're doing over the next couple months is trying to get that low hanging fruit cleanup items that we can address fairly quickly. And then we know there'll be some more difficult updates that happen that are take a little more time. And I think we're kind of looking at maybe next summer with some of those items. And so we're looking at it as definitely a 2-step kind of update.
I think as long as, if you try to put something through that is disallowing something that's allowed, you're not gonna get approved. So I see what you're saying, that there's a cleanup portion, but if you're trying to put, like at one point, they tried to say no more than 2 bedrooms. But that was not allowed in state verbiage, and I pointed that out, and they tried to push it through that way, and I got denied. So they had to rewrite it. So it's like, we don't really want to go through all these rewrites. That's a waste of staff time and community resources.
Yep, and HCD has to approve our ADU ordinance anyway, so regardless of what we do, HCD is gonna look at it. There's a world in which we send them what we do in March, and they say, actually, you need to fix X, Y, Z, you know, so we go back and we fix it and we add more, you know, so it's gonna be an iterative process. But I hear that, and again, it's like as many questions and little things you can say, hey, this is unclear, that will help us, because generally how we see that is just projects coming in and then we have to deal with it under the pressure of the time. But if we can get ahead of that and deal with it in a collaborative environment of like, well, how does this work for you as the implementer of this code, that is super helpful.
Do you see any trends for the transition from rental housing to owner occupied housing? I know there are some, or commercial to residential, like where ADA requirements are so overbearing for a commercial, say, a house that was converted to an office. And then the owner doesn't want to deal with that, so they just turn it back into a house.
From a new development standpoint, I think we're definitely seeing a trend toward residential. Lot 7 is a good example of that, and they have an entitled project they could move forward right now. It's all commercial, and they're saying, like, this isn't viable.
Right.
We're gonna go through the whole process to get housing. We actually passed an ordinance, what, 2 months ago, last month, that I think kind of closed a unintended issue that came up, which is a lot of the, what's it called, neighborhood commercial zone?
Yeah, CN neighborhood.
Neighborhood commercial zone.
Yeah, just the
Is like the-
donut, right, around downtown
Yeah.
primarily.
It's on like the corridors along Broad and up.
Right, yeah.
High Street obviously is one. There's like little spots that were identified many decades ago as kind of good planning, so people could walk within, say, a quarter mile or so to get services or goods. And so that was that. And I think we live in a different world now where people are getting goods and services a little differently. And so there was a change that happened in the code in 2017 where we removed the opportunity for some of these old houses to convert back from a commercial property. And so what we did is we just added that option back in. So if you were, you're originally residential, you said, hey, I want to be commercial, and you realize, in today's market that this isn't really viable, that you can go back.
So I think that was good. We had some specific examples of that happening, and I think that just the office landscape is different. People aren't, or they're working from home or whatever it is, but this is providing that flexibility to go back to.
Another thing that often is a planning issue is the lack of communication between the city and the school district in terms of the need, because when I look at some of the larger developments, the residential developments, you've got a whole lot of kids that got to be bused now, so they're all going out to Los Ranchos or something outside the city rather than being accommodated within the city because the schools are so constrained. Is there any path of communication there?
So I've reached out to them. I know that they've actually just redone their boundaries for several of their school sites. And I've invited them to come meet with us. I've spoken to them just on some efficiency things for permitting and paying school fees. But they work with a consultant, and so I'm not sure if their consultant reaches out.
They reach out to us every year for updated building permit information and kind of like what are some new entitlements that they need to be thinking about residential wise. And so every year we do provide that data to them. I think just one example was the school site that was supposed to be slated out of Rigetti that they determined that wasn't necessary for them, and they kind of turned that school site down. And so that's, based on the information they had at the time, that wasn't a viable, opportunity for them to build a new school there.
And I think longer, bigger picture, kind of longer term is CEQA. And, you know, when something needs an EIR, we just look at capacity for public services, and we redo our housing element, general plan elements, and we obviously look at that with the build out of the city. But we try to do both kind of long-term planning as well as the working on efficiencies and making sure they're looped into what's going on in the city.
Of course, Cal Poly and Questa too. In many ways, Questa is kind of the elephant in the room because they attract a lot of, you know, out of area students who are looking to get into Poly possibly, or maybe they just like being here, you know, so they're occupying a lot of housing that no one really admits to.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm in contact with Cal Poly a lot about their campus planning and things, and if you are not as involved in that, I mean, they're working on adding a few thousand beds to campus kind of right now, and they're starting right now.
7, 8-story buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
8-story
huge,
buildings.
it's huge, and it's gonna have an impact on the local housing market. At least near campus, maybe even beyond that.
And so their goal is they are going to simultaneously increase enrollment and also with that increase on campus housing, but they are going to get to a point where all first and second years are required to be on campus. So I mean, that has kind of been their goal for a long time, but they are getting pretty serious about building the housing on campus, which would be very interesting to see what the impact of the local housing market is.
So I have a question. So we were saying earlier that affordable housing, they're going to offset impact fees until occupancy. Is that something the city could consider for all projects? Like some of these big commercial projects we're doing, we're 2 years out before we have occupancy. We're putting out some of these projects, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars in impact fees. That there's no impact until they're occupied.
Yeah. Do you want to speak to the water and wastewater?
You know, it's interesting, I'm reviewing that right now, Sean and I were just discussing this for a little bit of introduction. I'm Aaron Floyd, I've met most of you beforehand. I'm the Director of the Utilities Department, and here Sean Scott, who is our planner, who formerly worked in CDD, who is now working with us over in utilities, help us work through these issues. There's a bit of background on that one that I think we still need to understand too. Historically, water and sewer impact fees were not allowed to be deferred because it's then rates that are picked up by the rest of the community. So there became issues with Proposition 218 compliance on that. So I think specifically to the water and sewer ones, those are still some things that we need to go back and forth. And I know the language that came out in the recent laws on that were a little vague, and it's a little difficult to understand how that actually looks for water and sewer. So it's something we're right now in the process of also wanting to educate ourselves on to see how that would apply. We have had some of those requests come in. Before this law was in, it was pretty clear cut that water and sewer would not be something that would be, or let me phrase it a different way. It would be required to have those impact fees paid at the time of permit issuance. Now there is, it looks like, some contemplation of delaying those. So I don't know if that's quite answering your point. I think what you're asking is a little more of a general concept of
non-housing.
could these all come in
I mean, there's
later time?
impacts that don't happen until the building is occupied.
Right.
You know, traffic, water, sewer.
Right, and that's a bigger question I think we would have to contemplate right there, and I think some of it, you know, will be dictated, obviously, as been discussed around this room. State law obviously is gonna have some major impact on that. Other parts, you know, left to the discretion, you know, from a pure utility standpoint on that, I think it might be a little more project by project specific on that, given the fact that if it is a multi-year and we are asking ratepayers to pick up or cover something, that's a little different, but perhaps if there is not, I think what I'm telling you right now is I can't answer that for you.
So
And
the
what I'll
answer
say
is
is,
no.
well, I can't.
Not necessarily.
Yeah,
I mean-
I think here's what I will say is we're working on, we did the user fee study. We talked about how the impact fee study was following that. That's taken a little bit of a break because it's so complex and we didn't have an assistant city manager for a while. So it's probably gonna pick back up. And I think we have had this conversation a lot. We just talked about that it's specific for nonprofit affordable housing developers and the fee deferral program. So it came up a little bit at council, but what I would recommend and what I'll do is as part of the impact fee study, when we go through the process of going to the commissions and to council, to both talk about what the fee is and also options for requiring payment. And we did this actually with the user fee study when we talked about, this is what we do now, should we change this? And I think it's a question that should come up and, you know, then we talk about as a community, hey, in order to give people a little leeway and kind of shake things up money-wise, can we defer things till, and even if it's not housing. So here's what the state law requires. We want to be more lenient and have the council provide us with direction on where they want to land with that.
So is it
Good question.
deferral for affordable housing, is that a state mandate, or is that something from the state?
So this, what we talk about up here is a state law, but we go have a other program that I was referencing that the city actually can allow a deferral to pay fees for 20 years.
Yes. We have historically done them for lengths of time before we did that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some that are
There's
50
years out
years.
there.
But so the city, and that is not a requirement from the state, but for, affordable housing projects, the city considers requests to defer fees for a period of 20 years for those projects. And that's, recognizing the significant impact that those fees can have on nonprofit housing developers.
And it's on those that we historically have waited for 50 years that water and sewer were not applicable to those, because at that point, you're essentially waiving the fee almost, right? I mean, it's that far in advance, and then we are asking everyone else to pick up,
I mean, my point is, I'd rather pay the 800 grand at the back end than the front end.
Again, the cash flow side of that, right, money in your pocket versus ours, I totally get the ask on it, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So we have 5 minutes left.
Can I ask about the water lateral plan,
The sewer lateral plan,
sewer lateral?
Yeah.
Sorry.
what's your question on it?
Is that gonna go beyond the first of the year, or is that still slated to go away?
Yeah, there is nothing in contemplation right now that would be waived at this point in time. We are doing the follow-up study on it. To be very transparent right now, we have some of the very initial data right now that we really feel that we need to do some further calibration on. I don't think a lot of people in this room would really be happy with what the results are showing right now, so we don't want to put that out there without ensuring. So we are actually sending field staff out right now to actually measure the rim and invert levels of all of the maintenance covers throughout town to ensure that we actually have the best possible data on that. We totally get the impacts to development on that project. I think we're all, you probably heard myself or Chris Lehman talk, at length on that project and how we ended up in that situation, but we totally do get the impacts of it. And I think what I would encourage you all to remember too is we have tried to make some inroads towards lessening those impacts. So, $4,000 that we now put towards all laterals in town. It was, historically one that if you were in a lateral or a capacity constrained area, it was 3,000, 2,000 if not. Given the inflationary cost, we moved it to 4,000 for any lateral in town right there on the residential side. So we are understanding of the impacts on that. We hope to have the highest quality data that we can actually take to make some real decisions on that in the future. And we totally get the fact that people don't love the project or the program.
Did it change that laterals that are being replaced are eligible for the rebate? Because previously they were not. If you had to replace a lateral for a project, we were not eligible.
We said lateral was a lateral.
Oh, great.
On residential.
And so still no plan to make homeowners accountable for their own laterals using the language that already exists about what is required in order to be able to use.
I think you're getting at, could we utilize municipal code to proactively go out and go into the private property side of the sewer lateral and say, hey, you need to upgrade this?
No, it's actually written when you read about the sewer laterals. In order to be able to be connected to the system, you must, each home must maintain, I forget the exact verbiage, must maintain the health of their own lateral in order to have the rights to be connected to the system.
Right, I think we're saying the same thing there.
Okay,
I mean,
sorry.
it's the private property side, and so the city at that point would be coming in and saying, hey, we know you have an issue right here, and proactively, we're gonna require it. When we took this to council before, the policy direction we very clearly received from them was they did not want us to do that kind of very kind of forceful, proactive going on to that and saying, hey, you have this issue right now. So instead, we are going with more of an incentivized version of that, of offering the $4,000, come in, we know you have an issue, so we will take care of it, and we'll offer you $4,000 if you replace your lateral right there. That's also, it was when we started seeing the inspection upon sale, it was required inspection. There had been contemplation by the council at that time of you want to have replacement on sale. And and the council at that point opted to not go with required replacement of the lateral on sale, it's just inspection. So maybe not as much as you would like to see on that, is for as proactive on that. But I think we are trying to incentivize folks to do the right thing right there.
And I think Greg has a question.
I have a question, just real quick, because we have somebody from facilities here. Can you let us know what is the percentage of Cal Poly wastewater that comes into the treatment plant, and what is the impact whenever Cal Poly gets their own treatment plant online?
That's a great question. So right now it's about 20%, 10 to 20%. Obviously that depends right now on when our overall flow is made up by Cal Poly. Cal Poly has maintained their capacity interest in our water resource recovery facility. They did actually contribute, are contributing up to $13 million of the current construction that's going on up there right now. So it's a $140 million project, which Cal Poly is paying their share on that. So they will maintain their capacity interest in the WRF. It is a great question. There's a couple things going on with Cal Poly that we're watching too right now, because it does change a little bit, but to generate more water for their on-campus needs for their master plan build out, they are utilizing more of their well rock allocation towards potable water. Currently that goes towards potable and agricultural water. So they have started the design and are getting close to construction now on-campus WRF, where they would actually take some of their water from their wastewater system and then send that back to their agricultural fields to then utilize more of their their well rock allocation towards the potable side. So a little bit of water shifting around on that. With that, we do anticipate seeing some less delivery. Obviously, they're going to want to take some of their water right there too, onto their on-campus WRF. How they actually operate that, we're still waiting to see. We have reviewed some of the documentation on it. We're in close contact with their folks up there, but I'm not sure anyone actually has complete granularity right now on how that's actually going to happen in the real world. So we were having a conversation on this Tuesday night at council related to the same question that came up on how water and wastewater would be handled for some of their on-campus development. Obviously, they have the retired water right there, but it's possible that someone could be taking a shower and you can see wet water molecules at any time go to both of the WRFs at the same time. So we're really actually not sure just how this is going to happen yet. The other thing we're also looking at on this is as Cal Poly starts to transfer seasonality of discharge as they move towards year-round instruction, we might also see a little bit of shift right there, just as going from quarter to semesters might also kind of throw a little bit of a hiccup in that process. So these are things we are watching and trying to contemplate all of these potentials on it, but there's a lot that could happen here still.
I have one more comment on the lateral replacement plan, or just replacing laterals in general. I've just by hearing me kind of grumble about the plan, I've had a few friends replace their laterals because they're like, wow, I didn't think about the environmental impacts of that or what that actually meant. Because a lot of people who don't understand construction, everyone in this room doesn't
Thank you for being an
understand.
ambassador then. We're getting the program out because we're trying to.
I'm wondering, like, have there been efforts, because I know you've been with the incentivizing, just for some reason, it's just not. Some people will do it and a lot of people just will ignore it. But I think if they understood the environmental implications of what that actually means when their lateral overflows or when the system overflows because it's taken on too much water, and what that means for the city and the environment and where we're living. I think a lot more people would be incentivized by that knowledge than they would by a financial incentive, if that makes sense. Because they still have to pay the overage of the financial incentive. They're still spending money.
I think, again, let me thank you for being an ambassador. I think there is a portion of the community that would agree with that. And I think those people are the ones we try to talk to when we do have our booth set up at farmers market, and we do have, other outreach on it. Not everyone, obviously.
But there has been focus on like the environmental.
We do talk about that, and when the people come back and say, yeah, it's $4,000 and it's a $10,000 and it's still working just fine from my side, it's usually not until the overflow occurs that then we go out and we tell them, hey, we can do the fiscal side of this, but the bigger, reason for doing this is exactly what you're talking about. It prevents root intrusion from getting in there, it prevents the groundwater from getting in there, and it stops the overflows, especially when it's right in people's front yards. They typically tend to take a little bit more of a notice of that, but.
Yeah.
I think there is more opportunity there. I think it's a good suggestion. I think we can try to appeal to the environmental side of it a little more. I like that. It's an optimistic view. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I want to be conscious of time. I really appreciate it. I really do value the comments here, and we'll take some of this back and talk about it. And I will set up a roundtable discussion. So I guess the homework is look at the state laws and carry them apart.
Thank you.